Hi, I'm Keith Barker, and on behalf of the entire CBT Nuggets family, I'd like to welcome you to the tool sets of Backtrack and Kali Linux. In this introduction, I'm going to share with you a couple of critical things, including how to get the absolute most out of the series and how to keep safe. Let's begin. I am very excited about the idea of you joining me in this Backtrack Kali Linux series. When I talk about Backtrack with individuals, a lot of times people have never even heard of it, which is really surprising to me. Backtrack and its replacement, Kali Linux, have literally hundreds of hacking and penetration testing tools all built in. So you basically install the Backtrack or the Kali, and the tools are just ready to go. Now, I want to share with you a word of caution with using any type of hacking or penetration testing tools. Let's imagine that there's a young man who's 22 years old, and he has his hands on Backtrack or Kali Linux, and he takes one of the tools or many of the tools and launches them, and whether he intended to or not, let's say he disrupts the business, steals information, or causes damage to a public network or to a public company, or even to his private company. What is going to be the impact, negative impact to that person if he is caught as the perpetrator of that attack? And the answer is never anything good. That's going to be a very, very bad situation. So I want to make sure right off the top that we make sure that we're going to use these tools for white hat use only. Now you might say, well, Keith, exactly what does that mean, white hat use? Does that mean I have to put on a white hat every time we're going to use these tools? And the answer is not a physical white hat, but a logical white hat. A white hat is an individual who is going to use the tools only in an authorized manner, meaning you've got explicit authorization to do exactly the test and the penetration testing tools you're going to be using, or they're on their own private network and never going to touch, bother, damage, or disturb anything outside of their own private network that they are completely in control of. So that would be white hat use. The far extreme of that, which would get you into trouble very likely, is black hat. And that's where you use the tools to do malicious things to networks where you're not authorized. We want to stay completely away from black hat. And gray hat is everything else that's not really clearly defined. So I would encourage you to stick with only white hat use on authorized networks where you are in control or authorized for the specific tools you're going to be using. And if you're not sure if you're authorized or not to run a specific tool, don't run it. If you do anything that is illegal or not authorized, it's completely on you, and I would strongly recommend you completely avoid any of that activity. This series is intended for individuals who at a bare minimum understand network fundamentals. For example, if I said to you, hey, what is an IP subnet? How does DHCP work? What is ARP? What's the difference between IP version 4 and IP version 6? A person should be able to at least understand those concepts before they ever start attempting to use attack or penetration testing tools that are covered in this series. So there's lots of great resources for those fundamentals, like Network Plus and Cisco and HP and Juniper have entry-level courses and training. I would strongly recommend you have a solid understanding of the fundamentals of the network before you start approaching tools that could be used for penetration testing and hacking against those networks and systems. To emphasize it one more time, we'd only want to use any of these tools in an authorized environment only. For example, let's say you and I get hired to go into a company and do penetration testing and vulnerability assessment. And we walk in, we're just not going to open up the entire toolkit and start launching everything. We are going to have requirements and guidelines of what we are allowed to do and not do. So even in those environments where you have specific authorization to do some tools, it doesn't mean you get to do everything. You have to stay within the guidelines that you're explicitly authorized to do. Anytime you or I step outside the lines of what we are authorized to do, we are putting ourselves at risk, which is never a good idea. So stay safe. At the end of the day, the major benefit of using these tools in a positive, authorized way is to improve the overall security posture for a network. For example, let's say we have a company, they have a network, it's in place, they've put in the correct controls, the technical controls, access list, authorization, authentication, all that stuff, and they think it's set. Then they hire a third-party company to come in. They have that third-party company run a certain set of penetration testing tools within guidelines just to verify that the defense mechanisms that they currently have in place are enough. And if they're not, they get the results from the penetration testing and they can make changes to improve their security. Again, with the goal of making sure we have the best fortress of security possible for that network. To get the absolute most out of this series, I would strongly recommend to stay out of trouble and to have the opportunity to practice these commands. Build an isolated, meaning not connected to the rest of the network. Build a test network where you can go ahead and practice. And it can be a physical network completely separate, or you can do it virtualized. You can have a virtual network living inside your host computer, again, keeping it separate from the outside world so that none of your attacks will accidentally leak out to any production networks. Once we have that test network in place, the secret to becoming good with these tools is to practice in that isolated area, that test network that we've created. Now, here's something that I've discovered many, many years ago. If I'm reading a book or watching a video and I try out a command myself, a lot of times I might have a typo, I might miss a switch, an option in the command line, and so the command doesn't work. Very, very frustrating. So here's what I've done. For many of the videos, I've overlaid the actual commands I'm using in bigger fonts. So if you're on a smaller viewing device, you can actually see the commands. And check this out. I've also included for many of the videos Nugget Lab files. And these Nugget Lab files are the commands that I'm actually issuing. So if you wanted to, in your sandbox test environment, practice those same exact commands, you could download from the Nugget Lab download area those files. And that way you could verify the actual commands by looking at the file. Or if you wanted to copy paste, you could do that as well. And this last bullet, just as a reminder, please only use these tools in an authorized way. And if you're not sure if you're authorized to use a tool, or you're not sure what damage it will cause, the answer is don't run it. Stay on the correct side of the line, keep yourself out of trouble, and only use any of these tools in an authorized manner. With these safety guidelines in place, I am so looking forward to enjoying this time with you in the series. We're going to have a blast. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.